Good evening, everybody. My name is Donna, and today we'll be reading Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Rings, Book 1, Chapter 9, At the Sign of the Prancing Pony. Bree was the chief village of Bree Land, a small inhabited region, like an island in an empty lands roundabout. Besides Bree itself, there was a stadel on the other side of the hill, calm in a deep valley a little further eastward, and Archet on the edge of Chestwood. Lying round Bree Hill and the villages was a small country of fields and tamed woodland only a few miles broad. The men of Bree were brown-haired, broad and rather short. Cheerful and independent, they belonged to nobody but themselves. But they were more friendly and familiar with hobbits, dwarves, elves, and other inhabitants of the world about them than there was or is usual with big people. According to their own tales, there were the original inhabitants, and were the descendants of the first men that ever wandered into the west of the middle world. Few had survived the turmoils of the elder days, but when the kings returned again over the great sea, they had found the Bree men still there, and they were still there now, when the memory of the old kings had faded into grass. In those days no other men had settled dwellings so far west and within 100 leagues of the Shire, but in the small lands beyond Bree there was mysterious wanderers. The Bree folk called them rangers, and knew nothing of their origin. They were taller and darker than the men of Bree, and were believed to have strange powers of sight and hearing, and to understand the language of beasts and birds. They roamed at will southwards and eastwards, even as far as the Misty Mountains, but they were now few and rarely seen. When they appeared, they brought news from afar and told strange, forgotten tales, which were eagerly listened to. But the Bree folk did not make friends to them. There were also many families of hobbits in Bree Land, and they claimed to be the oldest settlements of hobbits in the world. One that was founded long ago, even in Brandywine, was crossed and the Shire colonized. They lived mostly to saddle through. There were some in Bree itself, especially on the higher slopes of the hill above the houses of men. The big folk and the little folk, as they call one another, were on friendly terms, minding their own affairs in their own ways, but both rightly regarding themselves as necessary parts of Bree folk. Nowhere else in the world was there a peculiar but excellent arrangement to be found. The Bree folks, big and little, did not themselves travel much, and their affairs of the 4 villages were their own chief's concern. Occasionally the hobbits of Bree went as far as Buckland and the East Farthing, but though their little hands were not much further than the day's riding east of Brandywine Bridge, the hobbits of the Shire now seldom visited it. An occasional Bucklander of adventurous took would come out to the inn for a night or two, but even that was becoming less than usual. The Shire's hobbits refer to those of Bree, to any others that lived beyond the borders, an outsider, and took very little interest in them, considering them dull and uncouth. There were probably many more outsiders scattered around the west of the world in these days than the people of the Shire imagined. Some bank and stay only as long as it suited them. But in Bree Land, at any rate, the hobbits were decent and prosperous, and no more rustic than most of their distant relatives inside. It was not yet forgotten that there had been a long time when there was much coming and going between the Shire and Bree. There was Bree blood in the Brandybucks, by all accounts. The village of Bree had some 100 stone houses of the big folks, mostly above the road, nestling on the hillside with windows looking west. On the side running in more than half a circle with the hill in the back of it, there is a deep dike with a thick hedge on the inner side. Over this the road crossed by a causeway, but where it pierced the hedge, it was barred by a great gate. There was another gate on the southern corner where the road ran out of the village. The gates were closed at nightfall. Just inside them were small lodges for the gatekeepers. Down on the road there it swept to the right to go round the foot of the hill. There was a large inn. It had been built long ago, when the traffic on the roads had been far greater. For Bree stood an old meeting of ways. Another ancient road crossed the east road just outside the dike on the western end of the village, and in former days men of other folks of various sorts had travelled much on it. Strange as the news from Bree was still saying in the East Farthing, descending from those days when the news from the north-south-east would be heard in the inn, and when the shire hobbits used to go more often to hear it. But the northern lands had long been desolate, and the north road was now seldom used. It was grass-grown, and the Bree folk called it Greenway. The inn of Bree was still there, however, and the innkeeper was an important person. His house was a meeting place for the idle talk important person. Hold on. Oh. His house was a meeting place for an idle, talkative, and inquisitive among the inhabitants, large and small, for the four villages, and a resort of rangers and other wanderers, and for such travellers, mostly dwarfs, as still journeyed on the east road to and from the mountains. It was dark, and white stars were shining when Frodo and his companions came at last to the Greenway crossed and drew near the village. They came to the west gate and found it shut, but at the door of the lodge beyond it there was a man sitting. He jumped up and fetched a lantern and looked over the gate at them in surprise. "What do you want, and where do you come from?" he asked gruffly. "We are making our way for the inn here," answered Frodo. "We are journeying east, and cannot go further tonight." "Hobbits! 4 hobbits! And what's more, out of the Shire, by their talk," said the gatekeeper, softly as if speaking to himself. He stared at them darkly for a moment, and then slowly opened the gate and let them ride through. "We don't often see Shire folk riding on the road at night," he went on, and he halted a moment at the door. "You'll pardon my wondering what business takes you east of Bree. What may your names be, might I ask?" "Our names and our business are our own, and this does not seem a good place to discuss them," said Frodo, not liking the look of the man or the tone of his voice. "Your business is your own, no doubt," said the man, "but it may be business to ask questions after nightfall. We are hobbits from Buckland, and we have a fancy to travel and to stay here at the inn," put in Merry. "I am Mr. Brandybuck. Is that enough for you? The Bree folk used to be fair spoken to travellers, or so I heard." All right," said the man. "I mean no offence, but you'll find maybe that more folk than old Harry at the gate will be asking you questions. There's queer folk about. If you go on to the pony, you'll find you're not the only guests." He wished them good night, and he said no more, but Frodo could see in his lantern light that the man was still eyeing them curiously. He was glad to hear that the gate clang behind them as they rode forward. He wondered why the man was so suspicious, and whether anyone had been asking for news of a party of hobbits. Could it have been Gandalf? He might have arrived while they were delayed in the forest and the dawns, but there was something in the look of his voice of the gatekeeper that made him uneasy. The man stared after the hobbits for a moment, and then he went back to his house. As soon as his back was turned. The dark figure climbed quickly in over the gate and melted into the shadow of the village street. The hobbits rode up the gentle slope, passing a few detached houses, and drew up outside the inn. The houses looked large and strange to them. Sam stared up the inn with its 3 stories and many windows, and felt his heart sink. He had imagined himself meeting giants taller than trees, and other creatures even more terrifying, some time in the course of his journey, but at this moment he was finding his first sight of men and their houses quite enough, indeed too much for a dark end of a tiring day. He pictured black horses standing all saddled in shadows at the inn yard, and black riders peering out in the dark upper windows. "We surely aren't going to stay here for the night, are we, sir?" he exclaimed. "If there's hobbit folk in these parts, why don't we look for some that will be willing to take us in? It would be more home-like." "What's wrong with the inn?" said Frodo. "Tom Bombadil recommended it. I expect it's home-like enough inside." Even from the outside, the inn looked as pleasant house to familiar eyes. In the front of the road, the 2 wings running back on the land partly cut out of the lower slopes of the hill, so that the rear of the second-floor windows were level with the ground. There was a wide arch leading to the courtyard between the 2 wings, and the left under the arch there were a large doorway reached by a few broad steps. The door was opened, and light streamed out of it. Above the arch there was a lamp, and beneath it swung a large signboard. A flat white pony reared up on its hind legs. Over the door was painted in white letters, "The Prancing Pony by Barlaam Butterbur." Harry Potter, Butterbeer. Yeah. Many of the lower windows showed lights behind the thick curtains. As they hesitated outside the gloom, someone began signing a merry song inside, and many cheerful voices joined loudly in the chorus. They listened to the encouraging sound for a moment, and then got off their ponies. The song ended, and there was a burst of laughter and clapping. They led their ponies underneath the arch, and leaving them standing in the yard, they climbed up the steps. Frodo went forward and nearly bumped into a short, fat man with a bald head and a red face. He had a white apron on, and was bustling out of one of the doors and in through another, carrying a tray laden full of mugs. "Can we—" Frodo began. "Half a minute, if you please," shouted the man over her shoulder, and vanished into the babel of voices and a cloud of smoke. In a moment he was out again, wiping his hands on his apron. "Good evening, little master," he said, bending down. "What may you be wanting?" "Beds for 4, and stabling for 5 ponies, if that can be managed. Are you Mr. Butterbur?" "That's right. Barlaam is my name. Barlaam Butterbur, at your service." "You're from the Shire, eh?" he said, and then suddenly he clapped his hand on his forehead as trying to remember something. "Hobbits!" he cried. "Now what does that remind me of? Might I ask your names, sirs?" "Mr. Took and Mr. Brandybuck," said Frodo. "And this is Sam Gamgee. My name is Underhill." "There now," said Mr. Butterbeer, slapping his fingers. "It's gone again, but it came back, and I have time to think. When I have time to think. I'm running off my feet, but I still see what I can do for you. I don't often get a party out at the Shire nowadays, and I should be sorry not to make you welcome. But there is such a crowd already at the house tonight, as there hasn't been for long enough. It never rains, but it pours, we say in Bree." "Hi, Nob," he shouted. "Where are you, you woolly-footed slow coach, Nob?" "Coming, sir, coming," a cheery-looking hobbit bobbled bobbed out of a door, and seeing the travelers, stopped short and stared at them with great interest. "Where's Bob?" he asked the landlord. "You don't know? Well, find him. Double sharp. I have got 6 legs, not 6 eyes either. Neither. Tell Bob there's 5 ponies that have to be stabled. He must find room somehow." Nob trotted off with a grin and a wink. "Well, now, what was I going to say?" said Mr. Butterbur, tapping his forehead. "One thing drives out another, so to speak. I'm that busy tonight, my head is going round. There's a party that came up the Greenway from down south last night, and that was strange enough to begin with. Then there's travelling company of dwarves going west come in this evening, and now there's you. If you weren't hobbits, I doubt I could house you. But we've got a room or two in the north wing that were made special for hobbits when this place was built. On the ground floor, as you usually prefer, round windows and all like you like it. I hope you'll find it comfortable. You'll be wanting supper, I don't doubt, as soon as I may be. This way now." He led them short way down the passage and opened the door. "Here's a nice little parlor," he said. "I hope it'll suit you. Excuse me now. I'm that busy, no time for talking. I must be trotting. It's hard work for 2 legs. Now, I don't get thinner. I look in again later. If you want anything, ring the handbell, and Nob will come. If he don't come, ring and shout." Off he went at last, and left them feeling rather breathless. He seemed capable of endless stream of talk, however busy he might be. They found themselves in a small and cozy room. There was a bit of a bright fire burning on the hearth, and in front of it were some low and comfortable chairs. There was a round table nearly spread with white cloth, and on the large handbell, but Nob, the hobbit servant, came bustling in long before they thought of ringing. He brought candles in a tray full of plates. "Will you be wanting anything to drink, masters?" he asked. And shall I show you the bedrooms while your supper is got ready?" They were washed and in the middle of a deep mugs of beer when Butterbur and Nob came again. In the twinkling of the table was laid. There was a hot soup, cold meats, a blackberry tart, new loaves, slabs of butter, and half a ripe cheese. Good plain food, as good as the Shire could show, and homelike enough to dispel the last of Sam's misgivings, already much relieved by the excellence of the beer. The landlord hovered round for a little, and then prepared to leave them. "I don't know whether you would care to join the company when you have supped," he said, standing at the door. "Perhaps you would rather go to your beds. Still, the company would be very pleased to welcome you, if you had a mind. We don't get outsiders, travelers from the Shire, I would say. Beg your pardon. Often we'd like to hear a bit of news, or any story or song you may have in mind. But as you please. Ring the bell if you lack anything." So refreshed and encouraged did they feel at the end of their supper, about 3/4 of an hour steady going, not hindered by unnecessary talk, that Frodo, Pippin, and Sam decided to join the company. Mary said it would be too stuffy. "I shall sit here quietly by the fire for a bit, and perhaps go out later for a sniff of air." "Mind your P's and Q's, and don't forget you are supposed to be escaping in secret, and are still on high road, and not far from the Shire." "All right," said Pippin. "Mind yourself, don't get lost, and don't forget that it's safer indoors." There was company. The company was in a big common room in the end. The gathering was large and mixed, and Frodo discovered, when his eyes got used to the light, This came chiefly with a blazing log fire, for 3 lamps hanging from the beams were dim and half veiled in smoke. Barlaam Butterbur was standing near the fire talking to a couple of dwarves, 1 or 2 strange-looking men. On the benches were various folk, men of Bree, collection of local hobbits sitting chattering together. A few more dwarves and other vague figures difficult to make out in the shadows and corners. As soon as the Shire hobbits entered, there was a chorus of welcome from the Breelanders. The strangers, especially those who had come up the greenway, stared at them curiously. The landlord introduced the newcomers to the Bree folk so quickly that, though they caught many names, they were seldom sure who the names belonged to. The men of Bree seemed all to have rather uh, botanical, and to the Shire folks rather old names, like Rushlight, Goatleaf, Heathertoes, Appledore, Thistlewool, and Ferny, not to mention Butterbur. Some of the hobbits had familiar names. The Mugworts, for instance, seemed to be numerous, but most of them had natural names such as Banks, Brookhouse, Longholes, and Sandhever, and Tunley, many of which were used in the Shire. There were several Underhills from Staddle, as though you could not imagine sharing a name without being related. They took Frodo to their hearts as a long-lost cousin. The Bree hobbits were, in fact, friendly and inquisitive, and Frodo soon found that some explanation of what he was doing would have to be given. He gave out that he was interested in history and geography, at which there was a much wagging of heads, although neither of these words were much used to Bree dialect. He said he was thinking of writing a book, at which there was a silent astonishment, and that he and his friends wanted to collect information about hobbits living outside the Shire, especially in the eastern lands. At this a chorus of voice broke out. If Frodo was really wanting to write a book, and had many ears, he would have learned enough for several chapters in a few minutes. And it was not enough. He was given a whole list of names, beginning with old Barlaam here, and whom he'd go on further for further information. But after a time, as Frodo did not show any sign of writing a book on the spot, the hobbits returned to their questions about doings in the Shire. Frodo did not prove very communicative. He soon found himself sitting alone in the corner, listening and looking around. The men of dwarves were mostly thinking of distant events and telling news of a kind that becoming only too familiar. There was trouble away in the south, and it seemed that the men who had come up the greenway were on the move, looking for lands where they could find some peace. The Bree folk were symbolic, but plainly not very ready to take a large number of strangers into their little land. One of the travelers, a squint-eye little favored fellow, was foretelling that more and more people would be coming from the north in the near future. If room isn't found for them, they'll find it for themselves. They've got a right to live, same as other folks, he said loudly. The local inhabitants did not look pleased at the prospect. The hobbits did not pay much attention to all of this, as they did not at the moment seem to concern hobbits. Big folks could hardly beg for lodgings in hobbit holes. They were more interested in Sam and Pippin, who were now feeling quite at home, like chatting gaily about events in the Shire. Pippin roused a great deal of laughter with an account of a collapse on a roof on Town Hall in the Michael dwelling. Will Whitfoot, the mayor, and the fattest hobbit in the West Farthing, had been buried in chalk and came out like a floured dumpling. But there were several questions asked that made Frodo a little uneasy. One of the Breelanders, who had seemed to have been in the Shire several times, wanted to know where the Underhills lived and who they were related to. Suddenly Frodo noticed the strange-looking weatherman-beaten man, sitting in the shadows near the wall, was also listening intently to the hobbit talk. He had a tall tankard in front of him and was smoking a long-stemmed pipe curiously carved. His legs were stretched out before him, showing high boots of supple leather, and fitted him well. But he had seen much wear, and now was caked with mud. The travel-stained cloak was heavy dark green cloth and was drawn close about him, and in spite of his heat in the room, he wore a hood that overshadowed his face, but the gleam in his eye could be seen as he watched the hobbits. "Who is that?" Frodo asked, as he got the chance to whisper to Butterbur. "I don't think you introduced him." "Him," said the landlord, as answering in a whisper, cocked an eye without turning his head. "I don't rightly know. He is one of the wandering folk, rangers we call them. He seldom talks, but what he can tell a rare tale when he has the mind. He disappears for a month or a year, and then he pops up again. He was in and out pretty often last spring, but I haven't seen him about lately. What's his name? I haven't heard, but he's been known around here as Strider. Goes about at a great pace on long shanks, though we don't tell nobody what 'cause he was in a hurry. There's no according to the east or west, as we say to Bree, meaning that the rangers and the Shire folk, begging your pardon. Funny you should ask about him, but at the moment Mr. Butterbur was called away by a demand for more ale, and his last remark remained unexplained. Frodo found that Strider was now looking at him, as if he had heard or guessed all that had been said. Presently there was a wave of his hand and a nod. He invited Frodo to come over and sit with him. As Frodo drew near, he drew back his hood, showing his shaggy head and a dark hair flecked with grey, and a pale stern face and a pair of keen grey eyes. "I am called Strider," he said in a low voice. "I am very pleased to meet you, Master Underhill, if old Butterbur got your name right." "He did," said Frodo stiffly. He felt far from comfortable under the stare of those keen eyes. "Well, Master Underhill," said Strider, "if I were you, I should stop your young friends from talking too much. Drink, fire, and chance meeting are pleasant enough, but, well, this isn't the Shire. There are queer folks about, though I say I shouldn't. You may think," he added, with a wry smile, seeing Frodo's glance, "and there have been even stranger travellers through Bree lately," he went on, watching Frodo's face. Frodo returned his gaze, but said nothing, and Strider made no further sign. His attention seemed suddenly to be fixed on Pippin. To his alarm, Frodo became aware that the ridiculous young Took, encouraged by his success with the fat mayor of Michael Delving, was now actually giving a comic account of Bilbo's farewell party. He was already giving an imitation of a speech, and was drawing near to an astonishing disappearance. Frodo was annoyed. It was a harmless enough tale for most of the local hobbits, no doubt, just a funny story about funny people away beyond the river, but some, old Butterbur, for instance, knew a thing or two, and was probably heard rumors long ago about Bilbo vanishing. It would bring the name Baggins into their minds, especially if there had been inquiries in Bree after his name. Frodo fidgeted, wondering what to do. Pippin was evidently much enjoying the attention he was getting, and had become quite forgetful in their danger. Frodo had a sudden fear, in his present mood, he might even mention the ring, that he might be disastrous. "You had better do something quick," whispered Strider in his ear. Frodo jumped up, stood on the table, began to talk. The attention of the Pippin audience was disturbed. Some of the hobbits looked at Frodo, laughed and clapped, thinking that Mr. Underhill had taken as much ale as was good for him. Frodo suddenly felt very foolish, and found himself, as was his habit when making a speech, fingering the thing in his pocket. He felt the ring on the chain, and quite unaccountably the desire came over him to slip it and vanish in silly situation. It seemed to him somehow as if the suggestion came to him from outside, from someone or something in the room. He resisted the temptation firmly and clasped the ring in his hand as if to keep hold of it and to prevent him from escaping or doing any mischief. At any rate, it had given him no inspiration. He spoke a few suitable words as though they had said in the Shire, "We are all very much gratified by your kindness of your reception, and I venture to hope that my brief visit here will help renew the old ties of friendship between the Shire and Bree." And then he hesitated and coughed. Everyone in the room was now looking at him. "A song!" shouted one of the hobbits. "A song! A song!" shouted the others. "Come on now, master, sing us something that we haven't heard before." For a moment Frodo was gaping. Then, in desperation, he began a ridiculous song that Bilbo had been rather fond of, and indeed rather proud of, for he had made up the words himself. It was about the inn, and that was probably why it came to Frodo's mind just then. Here is it in full. Only a few words of it are now, as a rule, remembered. There is an inn, a merry old inn, beneath an old grey hill, and there they brew a beer so brown that the man in the moon himself came down one night to drink his fill. The ostler had a tipsy cat that plays a 5-stringed fiddle, and up and down he runs his bow, now squawking high, now purring low, now sawing in the middle. The landlord keeps a little dog that mighty fond of jokes. There is good cheer among the guests. He cocks an ear at all the jests and laughs until he chokes. There also keeps a horned cow as proud as any queen, but magic turns her head like ale and makes her wave her tufted tail and dance upon the green. And oh, the rows of silent dishes and the store of silver spoons. For Sunday there is a special pair, and these were polished up with care on Saturday afternoons. The man in the moon was drinking deep, and the cat began to wail. A dish and a spoon on the table danced, and the cow in the garden madly pranced, and the little dog chased his tail. The man in the moon took another mug, and then rolled beneath this chair, and there he dozed and dreamed of ale, till the sky and the stars were pale, and the dawn was in the air. Then the ostler said to his tipsy cat, "The white horses of the moon, they neigh and clamp their silver bits, but their master's been drowned his wits, and the sun'll be rising soon." So the cat and the fiddle played "Hey diddle diddle," and the jig would wake the dead. He squeaked and sawed and quickened the tune, while the landlord shook the man on the moon. "It's after 3," he said. They rolled the man slowly up the hill and bundled him into the moon, while the horses galloped up from the rear, and the cow came capering over the deer, and the dish ran up with the spoon. Now quicker the fiddle went deedle-dum-diddle. The dog began to roar. The cow and the horses stood on their heads. The guests all bounded from their beds and danced upon the floor. With the ping and the pong, the fiddle strings broke, and the cow jumped over the moon, and the little dog laughed to see such fun, and the Saturday dish went off with a run with the silver Sunday spoon. The round man rolled behind the hill as the sun raised up his head. She hardly believed her fiery eyes, for though it was day, to her surprise they all went back to bed. There was a long, long applause. Frodo had a good voice, and his song tickled their fancy. "Where's old Barley?" they cried. "He ought to hear this. Bob ought to learn the cat and the fiddle, and then we'd have to dance." They called out for more ale, and began with a shout. "Let's have it again, master! Come on, one more!" They made Frodo another drink, and then began to sing his song, while many of them joined in, for the tune was well known, and they were quick at picking up the words. It was now Frodo's turn to feel pleased with himself. He capered on about the table, and when he came a second time to the cow jumped over the moon, he leapt into the air, much too vigorously, for he came down bang into a tray full of mugs, and slipped and rolled off the table with a crash, clatter, and a bump. The audience all opened their mouths wide for laughter, and stopped short with gaping silence, for the singer disappeared. He simply vanished, as if he'd gone slap through the floor without leaving a hole. The local hobbits stared in amazement, and then sprang to their feet and shouted for Barliman. All the company drew away from Pippin and Sam, who found themselves left alone in the corner, and eyed darkly and doubtfully from the distance. And it was plain that many people regarded them now as companions of the traveling magician of unknown powers and purpose. But there was one swarthy Bree leader who stood looking at them with a knowing and half-mocking expression that made them feel uncomfortable. Presently he slipped out onto the floor, followed by a squint-eyed southerner, and the two had been whispering together a great deal during the evening. Frodo felt a fool. Not knowing what else to do, he crawled away under the tables to the dark corner by Strider, who sat unmoved, giving no signs of his thoughts. Frodo leaned back against the wall and took off the ring. How it came to be on his finger, he could not tell. He could only suppose that he had been handling it in his pocket while he sang, and somehow slipped on when it stuck out his hand with a jerk to save his fall. For the moment he wondered if the ring itself had not played him a trick. Perhaps it had tried to reveal itself in response to some wish or command that he felt in the room. He did not like the folks of the men that had gone out. He did not like the looks of the men that had gone out. "Well," said Strider, when he reappeared, "why did you do that? Worse than anything your friends could have said. You have put your foot in it. Or should I say your finger?" "I don't know what you mean," said Frodo, annoyed and alarmed. "Oh, yes you do," said Strider. "But you'd better wait until the uproar has died down. Then, if you please, Mr. Baggins, I should like a quiet word with you." "What about?" said Frodo, ignoring the sudden use of the proper names. I just caught that. "A matter of some importance to us both," answered Strider, looking at Frodo in the eye. "You may hear something to your advantage." "Very well," said Frodo, trying to appear unconcerned. "I'll talk to you later." Meanwhile, an arrangement was going on by the fire, and Butterbur had come trotting in, and he was now trying to listen to several conflicting accounts of the event at the same time. "I saw Mr. Butterbur," said the hobbit. "Or, leastways, I didn't see him, if you take my meaning. He just vanished into thin air, into a matter of speaking." "You don't say, Mr. Mugwort," said the landlord, looking puzzled. "Yes, I do," reported Mugwort. "And I mean what I say. What's more, there's some mistake somewhere," said Butterbur, shaking his head. "There was too much of that Mr. Underhill to go vanishing into thin air, or into thick air, as if more likely in the room. Well, where is he now?" "How should I know? He's welcome to go where he will, as long as he pays in the morning. There, Mr. Took now, he's not vanished." "Well, I saw what I saw, and I saw what I didn't," said Mugwort. "And I say there's some mistake," reported Butterbur, picking up the tray and gathering up the broken crockery. "Of course there's a mistake," said Frodo. "I haven't vanished. Here I am. I've just been having a few words with Strider in the corner." They came forward in the firelight, and most of the company backed away, even more perturbed than before. They were not in the least satisfied with his explanation that they had crawled away quickly under the tables and after he had fallen. Most of the hobbits and the men of Bree went off then and there in a huff, having no fancy to further entertain that evening. One or two gave Frodo a black look and departed, muttering among themselves. The dwarves and the three and two or three strange men were still remained, got up and said good night to the landlord, but not Frodo and his friends. Before long he was left but Strider, who sat up unnoticed by the wall. Mr. Butterbird did not seem much put out. He reckoned, very probably, that his house would be full again in many future nights, until the present mystery had been thoroughly discussed. "Now what have you been doing, Mr. Underhill?" he asked. "Frightening my customers and breaking up my crocks in your acrobatics?" "I am very sorry to have caused any trouble," said Frodo. "It was quite unintentional, I assure you. I must it a must a most unfortunate accident." "All right, Mr. Underhill, but if you're going to do any more tumbling or conjuring, or whatever it was, you'd best warn folks beforehand, and warn me. You're a bit suspicious around here at anything out of the way, uncanny if you understand me, and we don't take it all of a sudden." "I shan't be doing any of the sort again, Mr. Butterbeer, I promise you, and and now I think I'll be getting to bed. I shall be making an early start. Will you see that our ponies are ready by 8 o'clock? Very good. Before you go, I should like a word with you in private, Mr. Underhill. Something that came up in my mind that I ought to tell you. I hope you'll not take it amiss. When I've seen a thing or two, I'll come along to your room, if you're willing." "Certainly," said Frodo, but his heart sank. He wondered how many private talks would be before he'd go to bed, and what they would reveal. Were these people all in league against him? He would begin to suspect even old Butterbur, Fat Face, of concerning dark designs. Good night, guys. Thank you.